Mahmoud has enjoyed an eclectic and extensive career in archaeology, cultural heritage, and academia. Currently, he's teaching archaeology and cultural heritage management at Bethlehem University in Palestine. Prior to this, he was a former Director General of the Palestinian Museum in Bayezid, Palestine, lead curator of the Sheikh Zayed National Museum project at the British Museum in London, and a senior research associate at the University of Oxford. His primary research interests are in archaeology, Islamic art and architecture, and the cultural heritage of Palestine. He has also taught archaeology at the Palestinian universities of Bayezid and Al-Quds, as well as at the University of Oxford. He has directed and participated in numerous international archaeological projects, including at the Citadel in Jerusalem and at Khirbat al-Mafjar, and has widely published in this field of specialization. Hello, Mahmoud.
Hello, Felicity. How are you?
Fine, thank you very much. It's lovely to see you, and thank you so much for talking to us today about your work at the site of Khirbat al-Mafjar. Can you first tell me a bit about its location and the history of its exploration?
Well, the Khirbat al-Mafjar archaeological site, which is commonly named Hisham's Palace, is situated about 3 kilometers north of Jericho town in the Jericho Oasis. This oasis is located in the lower part of the Jordan Valley and is part of the fracture known as the Great Rift Valley, extending from North Syria to East Africa. The combination of fertile alluvial soil, perennial springs, and the balmy climate made the Jericho Oasis attractive place for human settlement. The site of ancient Jericho, known as Tel Sultan, has a place in human history as the oldest walled city in the world, recording the emergence of first settled Neolithic society based on agriculture and domestication of animals about 10,000 years ago. The first survey in Jericho area was carried out by the Palestine Exploration Fund, the PEF, in 1873 as part of the Survey of Western Palestine published by Warren and Conda in 1883. In the hinterland of Khirbat al-Mafjar, north of Jericho, the survey team recorded a series of aqueducts with bridges, reservoir, and mills, one of which was named Tahunat al-Mafjar, or the water mill of al-Mafjar, west of Khirbat al-Mafjar ruins. The site of Khirbat al-Mafjar was visited by the survey team of the PEF in December 1873 and wrote a short description of the ruins, suggesting these were part of a medieval monastery. In 1894, the site was again visited on behalf of the PEF by Bliss, who described the ruins as forming 3 distinct mounds. Further research and excavation works that took place at Khirbat al-Mafjar were carried out for 12 seasons from 1934 to 1948 by both Dimitri Baramki and Robert Hamilton on behalf of the British Mandate Department of Antiquities of Palestine. These revealed the magnificent palatial complex, including a palace, a bathhouse, and a mosque, all dating back to the Umayyad period, the first half of the 8th century CE. It appeared that the palace, which is not mentioned in the historical sources and only known from archaeology, was probably destroyed by an earthquake in 749. Baramki suggested the current name of the palace, who thought it was built by the Umayyad Caliph Hisham, while Hamilton believed it was built by al-Walid ibn Yazid, Hisham's nephew. The published results of excavations focused mainly on the architecture, the various media of decorative arts, such as stone, stucco, carvings, mosaics, as well as pottery. More recent excavations at Hisham's palace were carried out by the joint Palestinian-American expedition from 2010 to 2012, focusing on the area north of the palace, The archaeological evidence showed that settlement at the site continued after the earthquake of 749 throughout the Abbasid period, from the 9th until the 10th centuries, as well also beyond that until the 12th century. A previous revision of the ceramic material retrieved from the excavations of 1930s and 40s has already shown that life at the site continued for a few centuries after the destructions of the palace.
Thank you for that. Do we know what the region in the Jericho Oasis was like in the period immediately prior to the development of Khirbat al-Mafjar?
Well, during the period immediately prior to the development of Khirbat al-Mafjar in the early Islamic period, the area west of the site, along the upper part of Wadi Nwami, has been extensively settled and cultivated. The remains of a rural settlement dating to Roman and Byzantine times were found, including the well-known synagogue named as Na'ran. The sketch of the survey of the PEF also shows the remains of a Roman road, probably that once linked Jericho with the city of Caesarea on the Mediterranean coast.
And given the level of interest in Khirbat al-Mafjar over the years, going back to 1873, what did you want to investigate? What was it? Was there a particular aspect that you wanted to explore in more depth, or a particular question which you felt hadn't been satisfactorily answered?
Well, indeed. I mean, there has been a great interest in Khirbat al-Mafjar over the years. However, and despite the previous exploration and research that took place since the late 19th century, there were a number of research questions that hadn't been adequately answered, and I would like to address these questions. First, what was the nature and function of the Umayyad palace complex at Khirbat al-Mafjar within the context of its cultural landscape? The second question, were there any surviving remains that once were part of the historic environment which sustained the palace, its baths, including the water management system? Third, what was the pattern of settlement surrounding the palace and its relationship with the contemporary urban center of Jericho? And finally, fourth, how does this palace fit in within the phenomena of the Umayyad palaces, in Arabic, Qusur, known elsewhere in the Levant or Bilad al-Sham during the first half of the 8th century?
So that's really quite an extensive list of questions that remained unanswered. How did you go about answering them?
Well, to investigate these numerous research questions, I initiated the Khirbat al-Mafjar archaeological project in collaboration between Birzeit University near Ramallah, University College London, and the Palestinian Department of Antiquities. That was during the years when I was invited by Birzeit University to be a visiting professor to teach archaeology. And we embarked on this project as a collaborative project with the institutions I mentioned, as well as a training field school for Palestinian students from Birzeit University. So we carried out 5 seasons of archaeological landscape survey and excavations between 2009 to 2014 in the hinterland of Khirbat al-Mafjar, and revealed significant, exciting results, many of which were discovered for the first time. The walking collection of surface artifacts, especially pottery and flint tools, showed that the area extending east and west of Hisham's palace witnessed human activity from the Neolithic until modern times, but more extensively in the late antique to medieval periods, namely from the 6th until 15th centuries CE. A geophysical survey using magnetometry was carried out at various areas east and west of the palace. The topographic and architectural survey revealed numerous archaeological and structural remains that belong to the management, water management system associated with the palace. Segments of an extensive enclosure boundary wall equipped with semicircular towers surrounding vast swaths of fertile agricultural lands east of the palace, about 250 acres. Sections of 2 aqueducts bringing water from distant springs in the west to the palace, its baths and agricultural lands. First, Aqueduct A, utilizing water from the 2 springs of Ain Nuerni and Ain Duke at the foothills of the Kuruntul mountain, extending for about 4 kilometers. Second, Aqueduct B, bringing water from Ain Sultan near Tel Sultan, the site of ancient Jericho, to the southwest, extending for about 2 kilometers with the remains of a bridge over Wadi Nuerni. In addition, 3 seasons of excavations revealed a large reservoir and a water mill with a sophisticated hydraulic system along the lower part of the first aqueduct. The reservoir, which was dammed and actually collected a huge quantity of water sufficient to meet the needs of the palace, includes a stepped structure in the center to measure the existing level of water in the reservoir, and a drop tower through which water was brought in to power the water wheel. Remains of a mill structure abutting the east wall of the reservoir were also revealed. It is a 2-story structure, a lower wheel cell, and an upper milling room over it. Based on the ceramic and architectural evidence, as well as on the hydraulic mechanism, the mill has 2 phases of construction. Phase 1, dating to the Umayyad and early Islamic period, from the 8th until the 11th century, and phase 2, dating to the late Ottoman period, from late 19th century to early 20th century.
So this palace at Khirbat al-Mafjar was not just an impressive palace, but was at the hub of an incredibly active agricultural development, controlling a huge operation of crop production and processing.
Absolutely. I mean, the Umayyad palatial complex at Khirbat al-Mafjar was not just a sumptuous palace that built on its own by the Umayyad elite, but it was most likely established as part of an agricultural estate located in the north of the Jericho Oasis, where plentiful water springs and fertile lands were available. The aqueducts, reservoir, and the 3 mills, 2 of which no longer exist, were probably an integral part of the construction of the palatial complex and its water management system from its inception. Their construction material and architectural forms are consistent with that of the palace, all of which constitute a uniform Umayyad work. This can be testified by the use of well-cut ashlar sandstones, mason's marks, as well as the use of similar slightly pointed arch, barrel vault, and the horseshoe arch. It is plausible to suggest that the same masons and builders of the palace have also worked on the constructions of the water management system. Now, the interpretation of the water management system, including the aqueducts and their components, the enclosure wall surrounding the agricultural lands, changes the traditional perception of Hisham's palace. It is no longer an isolated pleasure palace or desert castle, as it was referred to by many scholars of the early 20th century, but a palatial complex at the center of a large agricultural estate to fulfill a twofold purpose: an economic one, to generate revenues for the Umayyad elite and treasury, and a political one, to establish a new Umayyad administrative governance center next to the old Byzantine town of Jericho. Such conclusion is consistent with the results of research conducted at numerous Umayyad palatial complexes in Bilad al-Sham, in Syria and Jordan, particularly that of Denis Geniconde's work at Qasr al-Hayr al-Gharbi. According to him, out of 38 Umayyad palatial settlements, at least 22 settlements are with agricultural activities, i.e. 58%, and with a better knowledge of several settlements, this percentage may rise up to 75%. I believe that these settlements may have also been utilized to help the Umayyad rulers of Damascus in expanding their political power in the steppe areas and the periphery of the urban centers in the Levant, and especially to forge alliances with the Arab tribes in the region.
That's absolutely fascinating. It's so easy, I think, to create a simple explanation for these, sometimes quite spectacular buildings, but actually they're much more important than that. There's a real integration of purposes, several purposes, sometimes within each building. At Khirbat al-Mafjar, do we have any evidence of the crops that were being grown that, this incredible water system was supporting?
Well, the presence of an enclosure wall surrounding large swaths of fertile lands east of the palace and remains of channels leading eastwards indicate that the area of agricultural estate was probably cultivated and irrigated. Archaeological samples were collected from a number of contexts during the excavation at the watermill, which were studied through flotation, microscopic examination, revealed remains, plant remains and seeds of wild plants and cultivated crops. Among the cultivated crops, 78% are several species of cereals, mainly barley, about 60%, and wheat, 20%. Most of the fruit remains come from a single species, the jojobi tree, which is cultivated naturally in the Jericho region. This tree is well known for its traditional medicine and food. Some olive stones are also present in the samples, but was probably the olives were brought from the mountain areas. Several types of legumes were also found. Other soil samples collected from the American Palestinian excavations at the palace, particularly the area immediately north of the palace, revealed several species of cereals. Here, wheat was found in larger quantities than barley. Different types of legumes and seeds of dates and jojobi were also found. So based on this archaeobotanical evidence, it is plausible to assume that large part of the agricultural produce and crops was used to grow cereals, such as wheat and barley, legumes, and fruit trees, such as dates and jojobi, but also a variety of seasonal vegetables. Most of these crops continue actually to be cultivated in the Jericho Oasis until today.
Thanks very much for that. That's very interesting. And I'm interested to learn that there's continuity, as it were, in terms of what's cultivated today. How long was this system at Khirbat al-Mafjar in place? And what happened in the region when this palatial complex was no longer controlling things?
Well, this is actually a very important question. And we tried in our archaeological fieldwork to find answers to this particular question. But we should keep in mind that the impressive water management system, including the aqueducts and the mills, possibly continued to function for quite a long time after the destructions of Hisham's palace in the earthquake of 749. This has been supported by our excavations at the mill site, the accumulation of sediments in the reservoir, which accumulated to 3.20 meters deep, and in the mill structure confirmed a continuous use of the hydraulic system and the flow of water to support agricultural settlement at the palace and its region. In addition, the recent American-Palestinian archaeological excavations at the area north of the palace confirmed that a rural settlement continued throughout the Abbasid period from the 9th until 10th century and beyond, perhaps until the 11th century. The aqueduct bridge, located approximately 300 meters to the west of the water mill and reservoir over Wadi Nuami, probably collapsed around this time, around the 11th or 12th century, which effectively resulted in the interruption of water supply to the reservoir and the flow of water towards the palace and beyond. This system may have ceased to exist as a result of the havoc created by the arrival in Palestine of the Franks, Crusader Franks, at the end of the 11th century, which caused significant destruction and depopulation. So the maintenance of the aqueduct has been neglected and left to decay. The population of Jericho and its environs had probably dwindled and the settlement declined or came to an end.
So the successful management of water is really key to the success of the Jericho Oasis. Tell me, was there any revival in the fortunes of Khirbat al-Mafjar in later periods, or was this effectively the end?
Well, it wasn't the end. In fact, it was, following several centuries of abandonment and decline. It seems that towards the end of the 19th century, or maybe early 20th century, we don't have much historical sources to support that, but we have the site and the archaeology and the architecture. The canals and aqueduct system in the area was restored, and consequently agricultural activity was revived. This is reflected in the complex of aqueducts recorded by the Palestine Exploration Fund team in 1873, and in the archaeological evidence of our survey showing the rebuilding of the aqueduct. Our excavation at the mill revealed that it was renovated using slightly different hydraulic mechanism than that in the first phase. The introduction of a feeding channel to carry water from the aqueduct into the drop tower instead from the reservoir. This mill type, consisting of a feeding channel, a drop tower, and a water tower and a horizontal wheel, was prevalent in Palestine and the Eastern Mediterranean, dating from the late Ottoman period. So during this period, Palestine witnessed an intensification of agricultural activities and food production under Ottoman rule, particularly at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. Prominent Jerusalemite families expanded their land ownerships and cultivation of lands in the Jericho Oasis. Among these were the Janis, one of the prominent Jerusalemite families who owned lands at Khirbat al-Mafjar area. They maintained and restored the aqueducts and canal system and utilized water from the double springs of Nuami and Duke. We can assume that among the crops that were grown were wheat and barley, and mills were restored for the production of flour. The analysis of the archaeobotanical samples from the mill have testified that barley and wheat were grinded at the mill. It is very likely that the advent of fuel-driven millstones sometime in the late 1920s to produce cheap flour put an end to this short-lived phase of watermill.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today about your project and about the incredibly interesting site of Khirbat al-Mafjar and how it fits in to our understanding of the Umayyad and later Islamic phases in Palestine. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Felicity.